Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Arojado. I'm a web developer, and these are guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to build your own BarGraph component in React and TypeScript, and also learn how to write tests for it using Jest and testing library. So this is not just going to be a straightforward BarGraph where you have positive values. It's also going to support negative values. And I'm just going to use HTML and CSS to build this BarGraph along, of course, with React and TypeScript. And I'm not going to use Canvas element, although some may argue that Canvas is more efficient, and I agree on that. But using just plain HTML and CSS, it's more simpler and easier to understand. And you can also easily implement the hover effect and animations if you want to. So without further ado, let me show you what the bar graph that we're going to build in this video. All right, so this is the bar graph that we're going to implement in this video. So in the first bar graph, you can see that it's all positive values, and there's a legend for, let's imagine this is your savings every year. So in year one, you have this savings. Year two, you have more savings. Year three is the maximum that you have saved. And thereafter, suddenly your savings go down. So this is the, straightforward bar graph. It's all positive values. Now, what makes this video interesting is that, our bar graph can also support negative values. So if you have you didn't have any savings, you have accumulated like a loss in the year three, you can see that, the line, or what we call the line bar, has elevated, and there's a bar graph that's growing downwards. So in this case, this is a negative value. And then thereafter, you have a positive value again. So this is the second bar graph. And for the third bar graph, it's all negative values. As you can see, the line, or like the baseline, has elevated to the top, and all of them are in orange, or growing downwards. All right, so a couple of assumptions right here is that you have web development background, HTML, CSS, NPM, Yarn. If you're new to TypeScript, that is fine. If you're new to writing tests using Jest and testing library, that is fine as well. I'm going to guide you along the way. All right, to easily get started with React, we're going to use Create React App. It's the officially supported way in getting started with React. And since we're going to also use TypeScript, they have a template for that. So let us copy this code right here and create our React app. So I'm going to name this as React TypeScript bar graph. So I already run this before, so you can just go ahead and enter this code. So after you're done with that, you can open your project in your IDE. So I'm using Visual Studio Code as my IDE. And I also installed Prettier on my extension. So in Prettier, it's a code formatter. It basically helps us format our code so that we don't have to worry about any code formatting issues. And this is what I did. I created the folder .vs code because I'm using Visual Studio Code, and this is the settings to activate the formatter or the Prettier in my VS Code. And then I added a Prettier ignore. It just basically ignores these folders when not to format them. And this is my Prettier config. So you can go ahead and use that as well. You can modify it if you want to. Another extension that I'm using is the ES7 Plus React native snippets. So there's one that I normally use to easily create the structure of a React component. So later I'll get to show you how I use that. All right, so now that you've opened your React project that's created by React app, we can go ahead and run one of the scripts from the package.json, which is the start. And I'm using Yarn. So I'm going to run yarn start here. If you're using npm, and you're going to basically type npm run start. All right, so once you've run that, that means that our React project is working. And if you see this in your browser, yeah, that means that our project is running properly. So now what do we do next? So what we can do is basically do some cleanups. We're going to, delete the code of the app.css. Let's delete the test file first. Don't worry, we are going to write tests later after we have built the bar graph. Here, we don't need the code. I'm just going to add in a box sizing here, border box. Or actually, I'm going to use it for all the elements. Border box basically mean that, it doesn't affect your width and height if you have padding or inside your elements. We also don't need our logo.svg here. In our app component, let's just clear it out. Rename this as L container. All right, so now we have a blank white page in our React application. So now we can just style this container. This will be the container of our bar graph. And let's go ahead and style it in the app.css. Just width as 100%. Make the width maximum of 800 pixels. We want to centralize the container using margin 0 auto. And then add some padding. And that's about it. All right, so we won't see anything here because we haven't added anything yet. Maybe we can add some title here. React TypeScript BarGraph. And yeah, I think that's it. Now you can see that our title is the same as our expected BarGraph component. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create the BarGraph component. Normally what I do is create a folder here, name it as components. This way, all of the components that I create is in this folder, so I can easily find it. So first, I'm going to build what we call the bar item. So each of these elements are what we call the bar item. So each of the bar, basically. So let's name this as bar.tsx. Inside the bar, this is where I'm going to use the React snippets. So you notice as I just type RFC, there are some snippets or shortcuts that, I can use. And normally I use the React functional component. And as you can see, once I click on it or I press enter, it automatically writes the code for me. So it's really a time saver as well. We don't need the BarItem title here, but I'm going to add a class name and use it as BarItem. All right, so let's also create a BarItem.css to style our BarItem. Okay, create a class. And we're going to use flexbox. So in this case, when we arrange these elements right here, it is in a flexbox dimensional layout. Later, you get to see how that is. So for now, let's just type in the rest of the styles. Height is going to be 100% of the bar graph component. Background color of each of these bars is in gray. You can see when I'm not hovering onto it, it's just a gray bar. So it's going to be background color F2, F2. And then let's add in some border radius here. So the tip of the bars have this, radius or rounded edges. So let's border left and border top right radius 4 pixels. And when I hover onto it, you see that there's a blue background color on the bars. So to do that, just do a BarItem hover and do 54060A. That is the color. Okay, so we don't see anything yet because we haven't used the BarItem component. So that's fine. Later we can verify that. For now, let's create the BarGraph component. Okay. So as you can see, when I create the React files or the JSX, what I use on the extension of it is .tsx. So this is the TypeScript version of the JSX. This is how TypeScript knows that, we are using TypeScript in this code or component. So we haven't used any types yet. So later you'll get to see that we're going to create or use one. For now, I just want to, create my bar graph, name this as bar graph. Okay, and in the bar graph, what do we see? So we see all of these bars. So we need to do some looping of this, or like rendering our bar items 4 times. So I'm going to create another container for the bars list. So this is the container for all these bar items. So for now, I'm just going to, import bar item 4 times. Not going to do any loop yet. Let's worry about the logic later. I just want to, implement the styles and the look of our bar graph. All right, so nothing is here yet. We haven't styled our bar graph, but let's just create the element for the lines, baseline right here. So you can see there's the baseline. I'm going to call this as the bars line. So this is the baseline of our bar graph. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a bargraph.css. Let's style our bar graph. This is just going to be position relative with a width of 100 pixels, max width of 100%. Maybe let's switch this since we are mobile focused. And then height is going to be 170 pixels. All right, so nothing in our React component yet. Now let's style the bars list. And remember, I said that we're going to use flexbox. So in this case, this is display flex. All right. Bars list. We haven't imported our styles. We forgot to import it. That is why we're not seeing anything. Okay. We also need to import the bar item right here. Okay. So let's continue. We need this bars list to occupy 100% of the width and height of the bar graph. So in this case, 100% and 100%. Okay, so let's just do a quick console log right here. Oh, okay. So the reason why we're not seeing anything is because we haven't imported our bar graph right here. So let's import bar graph in our app component. Let's just use the export default here. Okay, now we see something. All right. Now we can add some space in each of these bar items. You can see there's a gap. And we can easily do that using the flex column gap. And the gap would be 20 pixels. All right. So now what do we need to do? Let's style the line bar right here. And that would be the bars line. Okay, let's position this as absolute. Bottom, it's at the bottom. So it's bottom 0, left 0. And then occupy 100% of the bars graph or the bar graph. Let's also have a height of 1 pixel. The color of this line bar is a bit slightly black, grayish black. That is 505050 with an opacity of 50%. And then we don't allow any mouse interaction with it, so there's no pointer events. All right. So as you can see, we just achieved the bars line and the bar item. So each of them, as you see, I hover onto it, is also similar right here. Okay, what do we do next? Let's implement the legends. As you can see, there's a legend year 1, year 2, year 3, thereafter. Let's go ahead and go to BarItem, and let's support the legend. So let's call this BarItem legend. Let's add in some text here. So instead of doing that, I'm going to use props. So in this case, we accept props the legend. All right, so this is your first lesson in TypeScript if you're new to TypeScript. If you can see, we didn't provide any type to the props of this BarItem component. And now it's complaining that, legend has an any type because we didn't provide any type to it. That's why it's implicitly has an any type. So to have a type in this props, what you can do is do the semicolon. So this is the syntax for TypeScript. So we are defining the type of this object. So we need to also provide the keys that it supports. So in this case, legend. And what does this legend, what is the type of this legend that we need to support? So it's going to be a string. So there's also, other types or data types, such as Boolean and number. And the more complicated ones are the array and object. But later on, let's just start with string. And we can even, reuse a type by, making a type alias. So this is what we call a type alias. It's like defining a constant or a variable. And you can just easily pass it like this. You can even export it and other files can use it. So let's just do it like this. Later on, I exported this because I'm going to use it in our test later on. But for now, yeah, let's just leave it like this. And now I can just pass the legend right here. As you can see, as we're making changes, you may have noticed that there's already an error from React. This is because, when we added the type, we require legend in the props as a string. And in the bar graph, we are not passing anything. That is why TypeScript is complaining, because the legend is missing. You can already see how useful TypeScript is because, as you write your code, you already get these errors up front, and that helps with, debugging any issues rather than, debugging it later on. So I just need to pass some legends right here. Let's just pass year 1, year 2, year 3, and thereafter. Okay, so now all the errors has been resolved because we are now passing the required props of BarItem. Okay, so let's see what happens. All right, so as you can see, there's all these legends right here, but we just need to style them such that they are at the bottom of our bar graph. Okay, so let's do that. Let's go to BarItem CSS and style the BarItem legend. We need to have a position relative here because this is going to be position absolute. So when you do absolute, it will refer to the nearest relative element to base its position. So top, we're going to push it down all the way 100% from the top. And then the width is going to be 100% as well. Let's add in some padding. Make it 10 pixels. The color of the text is slightly gray. Font size would be 12 pixels. Line height, 14 pixels. And let's just align the text in the center. All right. As you can see, we already achieved the legend. It looks exactly like what we expect it to be. And let's just implement the hover. So when you hover onto it on the BarItem, it should also, make the text as black. So let's do the hover. So it's going to be BarItem over and apply some style to the bar legend. So this is going to be 2C2C. This is black. Let's see in our React application. All right, so it does this. It also changes the color when you hover onto the bar item. All right, so I think we're done with the bar item legend. What do we do next? Now we need to, basically implement each of these bar item. When we pass a value, an array of numbers, we want them to, have basically their representation of that value. So when you work with bar graphs or like any graphs, when you use values, you convert them into percentages so that it represents it by its symbol. And in this case, the symbol is the bars. So the 100% of the container would be the highest value, which in this case is year 3, and the rest would be basically depend on the highest value and adjust accordingly their percentage depending on their value. Okay, and maybe an easier way to understand as well is that I line them. So the only static right here in each of the bar graphs is our height, and remember we have defined our height as 170 pixels. So 170 pixels right here is our 100% of the bar graph. Okay, and you also notice that in all the positive values, the bars line is always at the bottom, while for the ones with negative value, the bars line elevates. Okay, and all the positive values also elevates. It's basically, you can also say that it's the same height as the negative value. So this height is the same as the height of the lines bar and the offset basically of the positive values. And if all of them are in negative value, or whatever is the highest in negative value, you can also say that it's the same height as the lines bar. That's why it sticks to the top, and the rest will basically adjust depending on what's the difference between the highest value to their value. So to easier explain how to implement this, the most straightforward one is the positive values. So let's say I have an array of numbers, which is 200, 300, 700, and 500. All right. So these exactly these numbers that is passed on to this bar graph component and have rendered, the bars in their percentages. Okay, so 200 is this year 1, 300, the value 300 is being represented here. The value 700, which is the largest number, is represented here, and the thereafter is also represented in this bar. Okay, so how do we convert these values into percentages? All right, so basically the first step is to get the highest number. In this case, what is the highest number amongst this number? It's going to be 700. Step 2, divide each of the numbers with the highest number. So in this case, 200 divided by 700, that is 0.29. Next one, 300 divided by 700, that is 0.43. Next one, 700 divided by 700, that is 1. And 500 divided by 700, that is going to be 0.71. All right, so now we have these values right here. All we have to do is just multiply them by 100. So step 3, multiply the result of each by 100. Okay, so we get 0.29 times 100, we get 29. And same thing, 43 times 100 becomes 43. 1 times 100 becomes 100. 2.71 times 100 becomes 71. And you can actually just add percentage here, and that's how we get the percentages basically. So now that we know how to get, or basically how to convert values into percentages so that we can represent them in bars, let's add in the JavaScript version of this logic right here. Okay, so first of all, let's pass in the first data array. This is going to be the same values we discussed earlier. Pass it here. So the value is 200. And the legend is year 1. And let's repeat this a few times. So 300 for year 2, 700 for year 3, and 500 for thereafter. All right. So now we can pass this to BarGraph. As you can see, when you hover onto it, if you pass a random prop to a component that doesn't expect it, you will get a TypeScript error because, data array doesn't exist on this, the props of this bar graph. So we need to, support that. Again, let's add in the data array. We need to, define the type. All right, so similarly, semicolon props, and what do we expect in a prop? So since prop is an object, you wrap it in curly braces, just like we did in the BarItem. And BarItem, and for data array, what is it going to be? It's going to be an array of, like what we see here is an array of objects with value and legend. So to do, what is the interface for the array is basically just array. And can be an array of string, can be an array of number, can be an array of boolean. But in this case, it's going to be an array of, an object. And inside the object, it's going to be an array of value, legend, sorry, an array of value, which is a number, and legend as a string. Right? And you might wonder why not we just, why the type is not like this. When you do this, it's basically saying that, you only have you only accept data array as one item in the array. You cannot support multiple array. As you can see here, it's just saying that it requires one element only. So if you want to support an array with any length, then you should use the interface instead. All right, so I hope that's clear. And now what do we do with this data array? Now we can loop it. So remember, we need to get the highest value in a number. In this case, let's create a memo. So use memo is basically one of the features of React hooks that we can use, which is basically good for, calculating or constructing arrays depending on a certain property. So in this case, we are depending on the data array. So what you're going to do is define BarItems and use memo right here. And we pass data array as the dependency. So anytime data array changes, this function will run, and the function inside the use memo will run. And then the BarItems will get updated. So whatever we return in this use memo is the BarItems. So we need to basically construct a new array, which is here the BarItems, so that we can pass percentages in each of these BarItems. All right. So let's go ahead and let's copy the steps right here so it's easier for us to understand. All right. So step 1, get the highest number. So how do we do that? We basically define a highest value. So right now, let's just define it 0. And as we look through the data array, this is going to be an object. Remember, this is value in legend. We just need this value. All right. So what do we do with the value? We basically compare it with the current highest value. So compare it. So if we can do a comparison, like if highest value is greater than the highest value, then value is greater than highest value, then we override the highest value with the value. Or the simpler way, you can even just use the maximum, which is basically comparing two values. Whichever is the highest is going to be the one returned by the function. So in this case, highest value with value. So it's the same as what we did here below. Okay, so we're done with step 1. So basically, if there's any higher value with the current highest value, is going to be replaced by that. We're done with step 1. Step 2, now we have the highest value. We basically divide the data array again, and we will get the percentages. So in this case, we can just return a data array map. So map basically loops through and returns a new array. In this case, this is the object of data array, which is the value in legend. Now here we just pass the legend again. And what do we do next? So we need to convert this as to percentage. So let's name this as bar percentage. And then divide the item that value with the highest value. And then it's going to be 29,431.71. Let's multiply that by 100 and just append the percentage. All right. This is basically combination of step 1 and 3. Okay. So now we can basically loop bar items. Okay. Let's loop that. And this is going to be bar item. And I'm just going to use index as the key. When you loop in array, when you loop in React in the render function, they require a key. This is how they know what has changed in the list of the items that you have looped. And in the legend, we can just pass BarItem.legend, and we also pass in the percentage. So BarItem.percentage. Okay, we are facing a TypeScript error because we are not supporting bar percentage yet. So let's go into the bar item. And let's do bar percentage as a string. So it's going to be a string. And what do we do with the bar percentage? Okay, we have the bar percentage here. We basically can just pass it directly in the style and use the height CSS property and just pass in the bar percentage. And that's it. Let's see what happens in our React component. All right, so the height is correct, but as you can see, all our bar items are floating up. This is because on our display flex, the default is in the flex start. And flex start is basically on the top of the parent flex container. So we can actually push them down and align the items in the flex end. So all of them will be pushed down. So once we save this, all right, so all of them are now correct. If you compare with the expected bar graph, we are actually already achieved it. All right, so we're done with the first graph. Let's move on to the second graph. So let's just see what happens if we pass in a negative value. So this is going to be the data array 2. Let's pass in data array 2. What are the values for the second graph? That is going to be 500, 300, and this is going to be a negative value, and 700. So let's see what happens if we save this. All right, so maybe let's just add in some space in our bar graph. Maybe add in margin bottom here. Okay, so as you can see, year 3 is incorrect. It's actually a negative value, but it occupies 100% of the bar graph content or bar graph container. That is because in CSS property, it cannot support negative percentage. If you actually see from the component side, the array from the hook is in negative percentage. And in CSS, they don't support negative percentage. So how do we solve this? Let's first see and take a look at our second bar graph. So first of all, the 100% of the bar graph container is a combination of the highest value, which is the thereafter, and the negative value. So we add this two, that is the 100% of the container. Okay, so let's write that down. All right, so this is the first graph, which is all positive values. So for the second graph, some positive values plus one negative value. Okay, so we add in step 1, get the highest positive number, which is thereafter, and the highest negative and the highest negative number, or in this case, it's just year 3. So we add in these two, and that's how we're going to, get 100% of the container, because, it's a combination. When you just, combine these two, it's 100% of the container. If you look at them horizontally, you can see that the year 3 is the same height as the thereafter, and also same baseline as, the negative value. So it's just like, splitting them to get the 100%. All right, so in this case, we have our values, which is 200, 500. No, let me get it again. We have 500, 300, negative 200, and 700. So get the highest value and positive, which is 700. Highest value negative, which is 200. So when I say highest negative value, if this is negative 300, that means the highest negative value is 300. All right. So just ignore the sign, but the value itself in absolute. So this is in absolute. So it regardless of their, sign. Okay. So let's put it back and 200 in this case. So the result of the highest value total is 900. So in this case, we can actually, repeat the same steps we did for the first graph, which is the step 2. Whatever is our highest number, which is now 900, we're going to divide it in each of the numbers or the values, which is 500, 300, 200, 700. And remember, when we do divide it with the values, we want to, disregard their sign. We just need, positive values. Okay, so let's do that. So in this case, step 2, let's copy the step 2 here. Okay, so we now have 900. All right, so this is going to be 56, it's going to be 33. Okay, sorry, this should be updated with the values. It's going to be into. So remember, we are using the absolute of the negative 200. So this should be in positive value as well. And this is going to be 78, if I'm not wrong. Yep, 78. Okay, so now we have the decimal values. You just multiply by 100, then you get the expected. So this is going to be 56, 33, 22%, and 78%. And if you can see, our highest positive value is 700, which is 78%. If you add in with the highest negative value 200, which is 22%, you'll get 78 plus 22, 100%. So that means that these two, the highest negative and the highest positive, is the 100%. Okay, so it might not make sense right now. You're confused why are we doing this, but maybe as we move forward, it might help you, understand it better. But for now, we have these steps right here. Let's just implement them. So now we want the highest value in positive. Yes. And then let's also have it in negative. So how do we know if it's negative? We just check whether value is less than 0. That means it's negative. So in this case, we can do a math.max with the highest negative value. And remember, this value is negative. So we want to make sure that we just get the absolute. So we can use math.abs or absolute with the value. So in this case, it will override the negative value. And same thing for positive value, we can do the same. But in this case, we don't even need to use the math absolute because it's already in positive value. All right, so we now have these two. So if we add the 2, we get the highest value total. So add the positive plus the negative. Okay, so now that we have this, we can just pass in the highest value divided with each of the values and multiply by 100. We get the correct percentage. So now let's see what happens in our React application. Okay, let's just see. It's correct. All right. So remember, when we're also dividing it, we need to make sure that we get only the positive value in the item value. So now in this case, this is correct. So now we are able to render the correct tier 3. If you can see, it's the same height as the one in our expected bar graph component. Now we just, move on to the next step. Maybe for the next step is basically elevate the line bar right here. And if you can see, it's still at the bottom, but we need to be somewhere here, which is just right on the top of the negative value. So that's actually a hint. In that case, we can store this as in that case, our hint is basically the same height as the highest negative value. That is where we elevate the line bar. In that case, we can use the percentage of the highest value negative and use that to, style the bottom of the bars line. All right. So how do we do that? Basically just basically have a variable here, bars line %. So using the bars line %, how do we get the %? It's basically dividing the highest negative value with the highest value, and then multiply that by 100. Just to make things accurate a little bit and don't have to handle, decimals, let's just round all the divisions right here, mark that round right here, just so we get a more, accurate percentage rather than, decimal. Now, what do we do with this bars line %? We can actually, convert this into a percentage. So right now, this is a number. And bars line percentage is going to be bars line % with the percentage. All right. So instead of returning directly the array, we can have a bar items here and just return bar items and the bars line %. Okay. So now this is no longer bars item, or this is what? Just going to return the extracted array. All right, so now we have the array here. If you hover onto it, you can still see the type, which is really useful. This is a string now. You can just pass in the bars line % in the bottom. Okay, so actually we need to wrap this outside and do it like this. All right. So sorry about the mistake. All right, so that is what that should fix it. All right, so now that we see our React application is now elevating the lines bar, which is correct. If you compare with the expected bar graph, you see that the line is exactly the same. Now we just have to, figure out how to push this positive values to the top. And actually, it's actually just the same value as the elevation. Remember, they are sticking to the lines bar. So we just have to push them the same height that we have in the bars line %. So you can actually pass bars line % as the value that, to push the positive values to the top. So I'm going to name this as the rise %. And in the rise %, we basically check if it's positive or negative. So only if the positive, we then push them up. If it's not, then it just remains at the bottom, at least for this second bar graph. Don't worry about the third graph yet. Let's just focus on the second graph. All right, so if item value is more than 0, which is positive, basically use bars line %. And if it's not, we just use 0. So 0, it won't elevate. All right, so let's make use of this in the BarItem component. So right now it's not supporting the props yet. Let's support that. Price percentage should be a string. And in this case, we need to do some refactoring in our HTML element here. We need to have a BarItem main. So main would be the actual bar, and another element would be the offset. All right, so offset would be the one to push the main bar at the top. So we can easily achieve this kind of with using flex again, but in this case it would be flex column. Later we'll be updating the CSS, but right now let's just pass in the height. So now instead of the BarItem having the height, it will be on the main, and for the offset we're using the rise percentage. All right, so after that, let's update our CSS as well. So now the BarItem main would be here, made of 100%. The background color and the top radius would now be here. BarItem would now be a flex, and the direction should be a column because we want to arrange them as a column like this. All right, and now for the hover, I'm just gonna pass in the BarItem main here. Okay, so let's see what happens now. All right, so all of them are floating again. This is because we have position. We are using flex again, but we need to justify the content to flexen. So it's similar to what we did here, but because this is in row, we align the items. But if you are using column, we justify the content. So we push them down back again. Okay, now it's correct. And as you can see, we have already achieved the offset because the offset is already having a height percentage, and that is why it's able to push the main BarItem or the main bar element. So as you can see, I'm using inspect element of Google Chrome, which is my browser. When I hover onto the BarItem main, this is the percentage of the bar, 56%, and then the offset is 22%, which is the same percentage as the bars lines elevation using the bottom CSS property, and it's the same throughout the rest of the BarItems. So all of them have the offset of 22%. If it's a negative, so height is just 0. So as you can see, it stays down at the bottom. Okay, so we're almost done with the second graph. We just need to make this look like a negative value, because right now when I hover onto it, the background is blue, but it should be orange, and the border radius should be at the bottom so that it looks like it grows from the bars line. All right, so we can easily do this by having this negative right here. If I think the value is less than 0, we can even create the let's return this so that we can define a variable here is negative if the item value is 0. So using this, we can just pass in like this, and since it's repeating, we can do the shorthand just like this, and this is negative, we pass in 0 if it's not, use the \line percentage for the rise percentage, which is the offset, basically. Okay, now what do we do next? Let's support the is negative here. Is negative, BarItem is negative. Okay. So now that we need to support this new props, this case is a Boolean. All right. So now that it's a Boolean, you can do a is negative right here. You pass in a is negative class. All right. So instead of doing it like this, we can actually install a library that I use, which is class names. So class names basically helps with conditional class names. For example, if you have a Boolean, you can just pass in Boolean to the class and it will append or remove it based on the condition. So use here class names. I'm going to import it here. This is going to give us a function that we can use to basically have a condition like this. All right, so it can accept a string, it can accept an object. And in this object, we can have keys. And in the keys right here is the actual class name. And if the condition passes, so let's say, oops, sorry. Let's say is negative is true, this will get added to the class name together with the BarItem. So if this is false, it will remove it and it will just have a BarItem. All right, so let's see, let's inspect by running our React application again. Okay, so our React application is now running again. Let's inspect whether the is negative is being appended. As you can see, it does append the is negative for this BarItem, the third BarItem. As for the rest, it is just BarItem. All right, so now we can style this. What do we do with the BarItem? So on hover of is negative, we want our main to not be blue, but something orange. So it is FF9869. And we also want the border radius to be different. BarItem is negative. In this case, we can just do a border radius 0, 0. That means the top and the left are 0, and then the bottom right and left are 4 pixels. Once you save this, oops, it should apply to the BarItem main. Okay, so now it looks exactly the same as our second bar graph. All right, I hope that's clear. We're now done with the second bar graph. That was easy. Now let's move on to the third bar graph. And the values for the third bar graph would be -150, -300, -700, and -500. So let's see if this is able to handle all the negative values like this. All right, so only year 3 is correct. That means because it is the highest negative value, it doesn't need an elevation. So it occupies 100% of the bar graph component. So same thing as the all positive values, whichever is the highest occupies 100% of the bar graph component. So you may have noticed this year 1, year 2, and thereafter are not sticking to the bars line. So what we need to do is basically use the same offset logic. We just have to know how to compute that. So currently, if you remember, what we're doing is that if it's negative, we just use 0. But we need to, do a calculation here to find the correct offset for negative values. And how do we do that? So the trick is in the highest negative value. We just have to figure out the difference between these two and just swap it. So now, once you deduct the highest negative value with the current value, you'll get the offset that is required to make it stick to the top. All right, so basically, if it's negative, we divide, or we basically minus the bars line percent, because bars line percent is the same height as the highest negative value. So we can actually use the percent here and deduct it with the bars, with the bar percentage that we get from here. We can actually extract this bar percent. So this is in number. Bars percent is in number. And just deduct the bars line percent with the bar percent, which is the percent of each of the item. Cannot find bars line percent. Oh, I've actually deleted it. All right, so now we get something from here. Let's just add in a percentage here. And now you can see that he was able to stick them to the top. So same thing right here. If you compare them, they're exactly the same. So we are actually now done with the bar graph component. And yeah, that was really quick and easy, right? So if you try to modify the values, you can also do that. Make this 500. The bars can adjust. Make this 100. Now there's a positive value with negative values. Make this negative 200. All right, so it's able to support any values with positive and negative values. So yeah, we're actually done now. We're now ready to write some tests. So I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next video to learn how to write tests for this bar graph component. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.